we begin, I love to give you a little bit of some disclaimers. And the reason why this training is meant for level 3 and people who are attending had to actually watch those prerequisites, because you've had to understand where I'm coming from. We're going to be talking about religion. That's a very sensitive topic, And so before I dive into these different topics and give my perspectives, I just want to let you all know that I respect all of your opinions and your beliefs, your religion, non-religion, whatever it is. I'm not here to try to convince you of anything, and I respect you and your faith. So, again, it's not meant for you to take offense. What I am here to do is I'm here to expand your perspective, right? That's what a good teacher, an educator does is, hey, let's look at from other different points of view. Now, some of you might say, Tim, some of the stuff that you're saying sounds crazy. Okay, fine. That's okay. Others, you may say, wow, I really resonate with that. Or, hey, you know what? That is very interesting or really weird. Let me do my own research. And again, that's what my really goal is all I'm sharing with you is my perspective, my sources, what I've read. I would invite all of you to do your own research, okay? Just as much as I've done. And then one of the things that I'm going to do with this video when I send out this recording, again, when you fill out the post assessment, you're going to download a handout of all these PowerPoint presentation slides so you can actually, reread them or rediscover them. And I will also, in the email recording, I will also include different video links so you can watch some of these videos in more depth and follow up and follow through. Okay. And so one of the things that I wanted to give you when I talk about doing your own research, I've done a lot of research to come up with several of these trainings for level 3. And what was so astonishing for me, and some of you may not be surprised, we're living in a time of great censorship. And censorship might not just be from silencing, like, hey, let's take down your videos, let's take down, different things if we don't agree or disagree with you. That is happening, but there's also subtle censorship, right? Right now we have, like, for example, YouTube videos, which is the most of my videos that I used for these presentations because I use the Google platform and it syncs very well with the videos. Well, guess what? I will find videos that I've seen before, search them in YouTube or search them in Google, and I'm finding that I cannot find them after going pages and pages. And so I've had to start going to alternative sources to actually get some of these ideas or videos. For example, Brave is a very effective platform that I've used. For example, I would have typed individuals' names, none of the research is coming up, but then I type it in Brave, and then a bunch of different videos will pop up. Sometimes YouTube, sometimes I've seen from hearing from different testimony of different people where they will post a video and there'll be 50,000, 100,000 views. And then suddenly the next day it's moved down to 6,000 views or 5,000 views. Again, you can play with silencing people and not allowing certain videos to go to the algorithms and to have people watch it and things like that. And you can, bring things to the surface. So again, I just wanted to empower you with other different sources. And Rumble, I know, is now a popular competitor to YouTube. It's definitely not as big. It tends to lean towards more conservative types of videos, but I have found videos on Rumble that I couldn't find that were once on YouTube that are now on Rumble. Okay, just a point to help you in your search and research. The last thing I want to say as a disclaimer is, remember, all of these trainings about elective society is humility, meaning I could be wrong, I could be inaccurate. So what I like to do is present this almost like my second version of a paper where, like, there's edits, and every time that more and more information is learned, well, guess what? I reserve the right to update this information because I'm not actually sharing with you all that this is the absolute truth. This is what I'm sharing. Hey, this is what I'm research. I will update it as I learn new information. And so I'd invite you all to do the same. Just like science, whenever they say science is absolute, no, science is never absolute. Science is never static. It basically says this is the preponderance of evidence that we have. And until we find new information, then we'll have a new theory or new perspective. But guess what? we're dealing with humans. People have different cultures, their own egos invested into different information, academia. So it takes many years before science, or the preponderance of different perspectives in the science community, whether it's, psychologists, archaeologists, or whatever, some people will share a new idea, but it's immediately dismissed. It will only take many, many years before, it starts to be adopted as the consensus. So let's start off with the discussion. All right, what is your conscious, or what is consciousness? It can also be written in different ways. Conscious. Can you please share with me your definition, and what do you think it is? And have you ever listened to your conscience? So let's talk about the definition of consciousness. Now, I pulled this definition from Wikipedia. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of Wikipedia, but guess what? It's a great resource. But when it comes to sensitive topics, I may not trust it, because, if it's a very sensitive topic, there's going to be people with agendas. So, but for the sake of this definition, I don't think that there's that much controversy about using Wikipedia for it. So, according to Wiki, conscious or conscious is one word. It's awareness. That's all it is, of our internal and external existence. And its nature has led to different debate. There's debate all the time. What is consciousness, from philosophers to theologians? And it's ongoing. No one really knows what the answer is, right? So that's okay if we don't know what the answer is. We're all discovering it. Now, let's give another definition. Conscious, again, spelled a little differently. Again, a different source says it's a cognitive process that elicits emotion and rational associations based on an individual's moral philosophy or value system. So I think this is where this idea is shown in the movie Pinocchio, where we have this conscious that is constantly telling us this is the right and moral thing that we need to do, right? And whenever we do something, my conscience is eating me alive, right? It's telling me I did something bad, or, you start to feel remorse, right? And that means that you're doing something that goes against what you may say is your moral value, or your values. So again, in the definition of conscious in Wikipedia, they basically said, hey, by the way, there's an ongoing debate about conscious. And is it a secular view? That's just a view that separates and takes God and anything out of it, and just says, hey, this is just something that's genetically determined. We've just adapted based on our environment and our culture. That's what it is. Nothing more, nothing less. But then you might have some people on the religious perspective say, no, your conscience is morality inherent within humans. It's something from a higher power. It's from the divine. It's like, as Christian said, that inner voice, a voice within, that inner light. What is this, right? So again, this just continues to go on as a debate. And I included this fun little cartoon. I loved it. And it really says, okay, science searches for answers, religion searches for answers. Science has strict laws and practices, religion has strict laws and practices. Science has lectures, religion has lectures. Science has big, heavy books, religion has big, heavy books. Science has long coats, like lab coats. Religion has long robes, right? And then science, they get to blow stuff up. Hey, in religion, you hear about a lot of other stuff being blown up. And science says that God is man-made, and religion said man is God-made. So again, I thought that was really cute. I hope that you guys enjoyed that cartoon. So now I'm going to share with you some new definitions of consciousness. So right now there is a documentary, it's several years old, it's called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Now, for some of you, this may sound like, oh, Tim, what are you talking about? This is about extraterrestrials, aliens, and things like this. And I said, well, listen, in this video, there's a lot of good content about this idea of consciousness. So I'm going to share this video. And then what I want to do is, here's a little summary at the top. They're going to share the latest research, and they say that consciousness is something where our thoughts and our feelings can create reality. And so the research that they're going to provide is, one, there's a machine that has a random number generator, okay? And our thoughts and feelings can affect this random generator in creating numbers. The second example that they're going to use is about water crystals, like little water, and then they freeze it. When somebody has their thoughts and emotions focused on that water crystal, when they freeze it, different emotions have an effect on the pattern of the water. Mind blowing. And then the third thing is plants and electricity. Okay, that I almost don't even want to spoil it, but I just kind of want to prepare you. They put a plant in a room, and there's a random light that moves all around the room. And guess what? It's supposed to go random, but once a plant is put in that room, the light naturally starts leaning a lot more towards that plant, as if the plant is communicating with the light bulb in that room to say, give me more light, So again, pretty cool stuff. So I'm going to play it right now from 48 minutes to 57 minutes. So watch this right now. All right, 48, 42.
Amorphous, irrelevant, interesting, but mystical thing. But the central operating system and communication system for all interstellar civilizations is consciousness and thought and technologies that interface with them.
God, prana, chi, magic, consciousness. Every culture throughout history has had a word to describe this intangible energy that connects everyone and everything. Decades of laboratory studies show that our minds have a mysterious ordering effect on quantum level phenomena. Despite overwhelming scientific evidence, most people would still be shocked to learn that certain scientists have known that the force is real for a very long time.
One of the people that I met in the course of doing this work was astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon.
We have sightings of all sorts. There seems to have been a great deal of secrecy surrounding the so-called UFO event.
He had an experience in space, an expanded state of consciousness that led him to form the Institute of Noetic Sciences to study the science of consciousness. I also brought him to the briefing I did in 1997 with the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. The data on that has since leaked out. Edgar Mitchell realized there was this connection between space and these extraterrestrial life forms and the science of consciousness that was very integral to the study. Most of the people that I have met with in senior science, NASA, aerospace, and intelligence community figures know that the key missing ingredient out of most people's understanding of the whole UFO phenomenon is the science of consciousness. The ETs are trying to encourage people to understand higher consciousness and universal mind, to be able to have a relationship with them that's going forward into the future. And Edgar Mitchell realized that quite early on because of his own personal experience out in space as the sixth man to walk on the moon.
What's the nature of the universe we live in? What is our relationship to the larger reality? If that's a part of the larger reality and we're denying it, that to me is unconscionable.
I theorize that there is a spectrum of consciousness available to human beings. At one end is material consciousness. At the other end is what we call field consciousness, where a person is at one with the universe, perceiving the universe. Just by looking at our planet on the way back, I saw or felt a field consciousness state. Dr. Edgar Mitchell.
We've thought for a long time that the closer we could look at the operations of cells in our body and our brains, the closer we come to finding the location of consciousness. And while there's been fantastic work at mapping neural connections and understanding more and more about the brain and memory, what we find is that we still don't know where consciousness is.
Adam Michael Curry is an inventor and entrepreneur whose groundbreaking work as a teenager caught the eye of Princeton's Dean of Engineering, Dr. Robert John. Dr. John recruited Adam into the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, where they studied the mysterious ordering effect of consciousness on quantum systems, an effect they called mind-matter interaction.
Now, a non-localized picture is the picture of consciousness on which we're converging now, which is to say that consciousness does not seem to be strictly produced by the brain. It involves the brain, but there's something much deeper going on here. Consciousness may not be localized to our bodies, but may be a fundamental feature of the physical world in which we live.
The universe looks less like a big machine than a big thought. Dr. Dean Radin, Chief Scientist, Institute of Noetic Sciences.
Consciousness, this faculty of being sentient, awake, is not limited to our brain waves or our bodies, but in fact transcends the limits of space-time. It's an unbounded field of awareness. And that is true whether you recognize it or not. Interestingly, doesn't matter if you intellectualize it. That is the reality of it that has been proven through scientific studies, such as Dr. John's work at Princeton, where they would have people put their awareness on a random number generator that's spitting out zeros and ones randomly and would intend to shift it, say, towards zeros, and it would shift without any linear wires, just their thought.
Essentially, what a random number generator does is it looks at something intrinsically random in the physical world, typically a quantum process, and it converts those into a string of ones and zeros. So you can think of it kind of like a coin flipper where heads is 1 and tails is 0. Now, if you collect a large enough sample size, you find a 50-50 distribution of these ones and zeros, meaning physical reality is behaving the way it should. Well, if you get somebody in front of the machine and you ask them to use their intention to mean shift the thing to more ones or more zeros, what you find is that there's, not all the time, but often a significant mean shift in the direction of their attention. Now, that's a very simple experiment, but the implications are absolutely profound. That suggests that, in fact, consciousness does not seem to be just an illusion or just a localized phenomenon, but that it does have some sort of capabilities to affect the probabilities at the deepest layer of reality, down in the basement layer of the quantum world somehow.
In this flow, mind and matter are not separate substances. Rather, they are different aspects of one whole and unbroken movement. Dr. David Bohm, physicist.
The best way to understand non-locality is to understand that in both physics and in consciousness, there is a connection that exists amongst all things, from photons to people to awareness, that isn't limited by space and time per se, that are woven within each other. Dr. Emoto, the Japanese scientist, began to experiment with water and people putting their intent on the water. And he did photography that would show these different crystalline structures. If it was a very negative emotion, the crystals would be all dissonant. But when it was highly ordered conscious or love, the structures were these beautiful ordered structures that he would photograph. And this was repeated by other scientists. Water has a crystalline component, but it's also tied into, like all matter in space and time in the universe, to this consciousness force field. If you enter into just a quiet state of consciousness and intend something very positive, it literally altered the structure of the water itself.
Non-locality is au courant with modern physics. Schrodinger talked about non-locality and entanglement in the 1920s, but it really wasn't until 1970 that Friedman and Clauser at Berkeley discovered that photons born together like identical twins can move off into the distance from one another, and you grab one twin and you change the polarization of the other, even though they're very, very far apart. And the lingo describing this in modern physics is, we would say, they're entangled with one another.
There was an unpublished experiment that we did at the Pear Lab, which we called plant RNG. You have a room with no windows, and you have a house plant that needs light to grow. You have a single growing light up on the roof. The growing light can turn in one of 4 quadrants, and which quadrant that light is showing is controlled by a random number generator. So you put the plant in one corner of the room. The light has an equal chance of shining in all 4 quadrants. But you give it enough time, and what you find is the light actually shines far more often on the plant than on the other coordinates. it's as though life itself, even life or consciousness in something as simple as a houseplant, bends probabilities in the physical world in the direction of what it needs, in the direction of its growth and its evolution. I see that experiment as profound because it shows to me what consciousness does in the world.
How could ESP work? Does ESP violate any physics? First of all, you can't violate the laws of physics, not like going through a stop sign. If you have a phenomenon, physics has to change to agree with your phenomena.
The biggest.
All right. So I think that was a pretty cool video. I hope all of you feel the same. Now, again, if you have any other comments, feel free to, share it in the chat. But I want to keep going because there's more information that I want to share with all of you. Okay. Let's keep going. So there is a famous documentary. Please put in the chat if any of you have ever seen it. It's called What the Bleep Do We Know? Okay. And in this documentary, they talk about quantum mechanics and quantum physics. And there's this famous experiment, and some of you may have heard of it. It's called the double slit experiment. And I think it's very important for you to understand why this experiment is so important in terms of the understanding of consciousness. What they said was they did an experiment where they were like shooting marbles through this disk. And then at one point it had a certain pattern. Then they shot an electron, which is a particle, through these disks, and two different phenomenons happen. All right, so that's all that I want to share with you. So let's watch the video and feel free to comment in the chat. Okay, let's play it.
And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous double slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So when we throw things, that is matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, Maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. And it was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange netherworld of quantum events. What is matter? Marbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
All right. Pretty interesting stuff. So now we're tapping into other different alternative viewpoints, discussions about consciousness. And one of the persons that I think it's very important for you to be aware of, especially we're going to talk about in different sections of level 3 trainings, is this guy by the name of Edgar Cayce. And he became very popular. He lived from, I guess, the late 1800s to the early 1930s, 1940s. And this is a video from a YouTube channel called Y Files. Now, again, the channel can be very entertaining. I've sometimes watched the videos, but I just want to let you know is that my little disclaimer is that the YouTube channel does not do a deep dive into the level of research that I would like whenever they do a different video. I view it as very entertaining, and it's just a spark for you to then do your own research. But he did a pretty good job in the beginning and the end of this video talking about Edgar Cayce's biography. And the reason why he's so important is he was able to do something that was quite remarkable. He was able to tap into non-local consciousness, meaning other people have redefined it in different terms. But I'm going to show this video, and I think it really does a great job of explaining how this works and how there's a different perspective on how you view Edgar Cayce. And we're going to be talking about him. All right, so let me play the video right now. Okay.
The first thing the young telegraph operator noticed was the small black couch. This was 1935, and Sigmund Freud, who was still alive, had made the psychiatrist's couch a symbol of psychoanalysis and therapy. But the young man hadn't come to the office to see a shrink. He was there to see the most famous psychic in the country, Edgar Cayce. Cayce entered the room, soft-spoken and well-dressed, and he explained that he, not the young man, would be the one on the couch. So Cayce kicked off his shoes, lay back, and put himself into a deep trance. And after a few minutes, Cayce began to whisper all sorts of things about the past, present, and the future. It was then that the young man realized that Cayce wasn't just making predictions about his life. He was making predictions about everyone, events that were to happen all over the world. And since then, Edgar Cayce has been called the sleeping prophet. Let's find out why. Edgar Casey was born into a poor farming family in rural Kentucky. He was never an average kid. When other children were outside playing, Edgar wanted to study the Bible. Now, soon he would take to wandering into the forest to play with what he called little folk.
Like Peter Dinklage?
No, they were more like fairies.
Oh, you mean like...
Don't. When Edgar was 11 years old, he was in the woods reading his Bible when he was visited by what he called a woman with wings. And the woman asked him what he wanted most out of life. And he said he wanted to help others, especially sick children. Later that day, Edgar Casey's father received a letter from his school complaining about his son's performance. So his father tested his spelling and was so upset with how poorly Edgar did, he knocked the boy out of his chair. And while on the ground with his ears still ringing, 11-year-old Edgar heard the voice of the woman in the forest. She told him to lay his head down on his school book and go to sleep. When he woke up, Edgar knew everything in the book, like everything. He was able to recite the book word for word. So Edgar began studying by sleeping on his books.
BS. There's no way that works.
Well, by the end of the year, he was the best student in school and even moved up a grade.
Oh.
And his parents were starting to catch on that something was special about their son. While playing at school, Edgar suffered a spinal injury that left him partially paralyzed. And that night while he slept, Casey recited the ingredients for an herbal cure that he said would fix his injuries. Now, his parents had nothing to lose, so they prepared the remedy according to their son's instructions. The next morning, Edgar was cured. When Casey was a little older, he developed severe laryngitis. Doctors couldn't explain it, so Casey went to see a hypnotist.
As you do.
While in a trance, Casey said the issue was psychological paralysis. The hypnotist then directed Casey to increase blood flow to the area. Casey's throat turned bright red. He woke up and he was cured. Casey's fiance told him that he had a gift that was given to him by God and he should share it with the world. So Edgar Casey began performing readings twice a day on the sick and injured. And in 1902, Casey gave a reading that helped define his legacy. A 5-year-old girl had been diagnosed with a fatal brain injury. With nothing to lose, her parents turned to Edgar Casey. He determined that she actually had a spinal injury. He suggested a vertebrae readjustment. Within a few months, she had fully recovered. And then the letters came pouring in. For the next 40 years, Edgar Casey gave thousands of readings and helped countless people. But Edgar Casey's talent wasn't limited to medical diagnoses. He made a number of predictions about future events, many of which have come true, and some of them are terrifying.
Now I'm going to pause it and I'm going to fast forward it to 10:04. And then we're going to be talking about what that prediction was in a different training as it relates to being more resilient and not succumbing to fear. But let's keep going. Here we go.
Now, to be fair, Edgar Casey has his detractors. He gave over 14,000 readings, so he's going to be right at least some of the time. It's the correct predictions that make headlines. Nobody really notices the things that Casey got wrong. Casey used expressions like perhaps and maybe and I feel that rather than using positive declarations. And this is a common technique used by strip mall psychics. This is known as the Barnum effect, a common psychological phenomenon where people tend to accept vague descriptions as uniquely applicable to themselves. Now, there were many occasions where Casey would receive a letter from a sick person and then do a reading for them, giving them a diagnosis. Casey didn't know that when he was in his trance, the people were already dead. Now, Casey supporters defend this by saying, well, if they had applied the cure while they were alive, they wouldn't have died. Okay, sure. But if Casey was talking to spirits or communing with the universe or whatever he did, the universe should have given him a heads up. Every time Casey got something wrong, there was always a convenient excuse. For example, Casey gave the location for buried pirate treasure, which sent people scrambling all over the world looking for it.
No treasure?
No. Casey supporters said it was possible the ghosts of Native Americans or pirates were playing tricks on him.
Ghost pirates are pretty sneaky.
You cheated. Pirate.
Was Edgar Casey a psychic? I don't really know. Nobody does. Edgar Casey was never exposed as a hoaxer, and I believe that he saw whatever it is that he saw. And a recent poll surveyed thousands of American adults of similar income, education, and academic performance, and it found that 50% of people believe in some form of ESP or psychic phenomena. What the poll also found is that people who do not believe in psychics tend to be more structured and analytical in their thinking.
Eggheads.
And the people who do believe are more emotional and creative in their thinking.
Hippies.
Well, the poll was quick to point out that believers were gullible and lacked critical thinking skills. Now, that may be true to an extent, but the poll also found, and this is important, that those quote unquote gullible believers were far happier in their lives and had much lower levels of stress than skeptics. When we talk about psychic phenomena or the supernatural aspects of religion,
6 of 1.
these are things that defy scientific explanation, but nobody can deny that these things provide solace to the bereaved, hope to the unfortunate, and structure to an existence that is chaotic at best. Does the supernatural exist? I don't know. I would agree that most psychics are frauds taking advantage of people, but Edgar Cayce never took a penny. He really wanted to help people. Now, whether he was a real psychic or delusionary, I don't think that matters. We need more people willing to dedicate their lives to helping others. We need more people who see themselves not as the center of the universe, but part of it, part of a larger community where we have to look after each other. Real or not, we need more people like Edgar Cayce, now more than ever.
So the Y-Files does a really great job of sharing some new insight, and then in the end saying, hey, for the people who want to believe it here, and for those people who want to debunk it, here's your evidence here. And so he kind of then washes his hands of it. But this one I think was a really good video, because it really showed that even the author of this video said, hey, this is quite impressive that Edgar Cayce, he doesn't fit the typical description of like charlatans. And what's so amazing is that Edgar Cayce had, I believe it was his wife, all of his readings were excellent notes, and records were actually taken of each one of his readings, where he would lie down on the couch, get into a resting state, and then share everything that he was able to tap into. And it's so amazing that he did 14,000 predictions, right? And readings. And he's considered the father of holistic medicine, because a lot of the people that saw him came to him to help with healing ailments. And he basically said, not only do you need to do stuff spiritually and emotionally, but you also have to do things physically. So I think he did a great job of balancing both the science and body with also the mind, thoughts, and feelings, which was kind of very interesting. So there's, out of 14,000 readings, 12,000 of them have been accurate, which I think is quite impressive based on people who've researched him. And again, there is an institute called the Association of Research and Enlightenment that has a record of all these different types of readings. And so therefore you can actually read them yourself and things like that. So we'll talk about it a little bit later, but let's continue on with the training, where this is a researcher by the name of Stephen Schwartz. And he basically talked about quantum mechanics, the father, Max Planck, and what he said. And he basically studied the readings of Edgar Cayce, and that led him to say, what the heck is Edgar Cayce being able to tap into? Now, Stephen Schwartz is a researcher. He's not into the woo-woo stuff of spirituality. He's a scientist. He wants to do experiments and things like that. And this is a video where he starts talking about, hey, there's something up with this whole idea of consciousness. And so I'm going to actually, for the sake of time, send the video recording along with the additional resources. So I'm not going to play it right now, but here's the summary of it, right? He mentions Max Planck is the father of quantum mechanics. And he said, and he didn't do a lot of interviews, that consciousness is everything. It's causal and fundamental. And later in the video, he says it's your ability to maintain and sustain attention, focus, awareness during meditation that allows you to tap into this universal consciousness. It's that still small voice. And, Stephen Schwartz, he claims that he's the father, one of the founders of remote viewing. I don't know if I'd go that far, but he is a definite invaluable researcher in this whole idea of remote viewing. And he says that remote viewing is a terrible term for it. It's called accessing non-local consciousness, because some people have the ability to tap in and see the past, the future, and different places, points of time on this planet and other places. So again, for those of you who are interested, can watch one of it as an additional resource. But for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. Okay. Next slide. Now, here is a guy by the name of John Van Auken. I love him. He's like, to me, like a funny Santa Claus. You know, he has a great personality. He's an excellent researcher. He's actually a director for the Association of Research and Enlightenment. And he has done a lot of readings, researched all the Edgar Cayce material, and he's written several books about different topics of what Edgar Cayce talked about in his readings, what he recommended. And so this was a specific training that he did, a lecture on healing. Now, guess what? The first half of the presentation, it's all about consciousness and spirituality and thoughts and emotions creating reality. And then the second half of the presentation, it's all about science and your human body and what you need to do to actually take care of yourself. So I'm just going to share a couple minutes of when he talks about what were the findings of Edgar Cayce and how does it match things that we're discovering, biblical texts, things like this in the study of consciousness. Okay, so let's go to 520 and 912.
Comment.
520. Here we go.
Also, he was asked right after saying that, well, what keeps the body alive? And he said, spirit. Spirit is the life force. It's in everything. Spirit is in everything. Plants, flowers, rocks. Spirit is the life essence in different form. The soul is the unique individual. And that individual is going to come into that body and have a sojourn. Then when the body stops functioning, the individual is going to leave. And he actually, in the 30s, he actually predicted what we came to discover in the late 60s, early 70s. He said, in that period of time, the late 60s, early 70s, you will have a different view of death. And what happened was medical profession got so sophisticated that you could die on them, die, dead, and they could bring you back to life with chemistry, physical manipulation of your heart. And all of us know what the word clear means, don't we? They're about to zap the person. The problem among these doctors was in the recovery room when they would go in there and say, boy, we had a close one with you. And the patient would say, yeah, I was amazed when you jumped up on my chest like that. And the doctor would say, wait a minute, you were dead. Well, I thought it was strange too, but I was standing over in the corner and the nurse did this and you did that. And when you got up on my chest, and the doctors would just record these, you know, and then the books came out. If you go to Amazon right now, there are over 30 books on near-death experience. It's a fascinating shift in our awareness that we now have some evidence of some portion of a dead person alive in the room. And that portion survived the death of the body and re-entered the body once we got it functioning again. That's you and me. So here we go. Raising the inner healing light. The concept comes from Luke, in which Jesus says, the kingdom of God, or the creator or the source of life, is within you. Yes, you can use drugs out here. You can use surgery out here, physical manipulation, spa practices and all. But the truth is the real healing always comes from within you. You have to tap in to that inner healing. So there are two ways, according to Cayce, to raise the inner healing light. You have to do it in your heart and mind, or the body won't fully respond. No matter what you're doing in body, the body will get to doubt if the mind doesn't believe, if the heart isn't in it. He would say to people, he said, now during the therapy, keep an expectant attitude. Don't have an attitude of, well, let's try this. Do you see what I mean? The difference is powerful in the result. So heart and mind. And then, of course, you have to understand your body temple. And you know, Edgar Cayce was very detailed on the functioning of the body. I mean, he would really get into all the systems and where the problem was. And then he would say, that you can't just heal that part of the body because it's an organism, it's a system, they all work together. So you must take the whole body in consideration as you heal a person. So we'll see all of this as we go, but keep in mind that it's the two ways are heart and mind, and then the physical body, doing things for the body temple. So heart and mind is actually.
All right, so I'm going to pause it there because I want to show you another clip at 2040. Okay, let's go. 2040.
Casey identifies the reason for our existence as, quote, that the created, that's you and me at the soul level, would be the companion to the creator. The companion. This is the reason we were created, and as a result, the created, our soul, is given opportunities to, quote, show itself to be not only worthy of, but companionable to the creator. So your situations and your karma and your dynamics are opportunities for you to become more godlike, more godly, more companionable to the creator. And the qualities of the creator are love, patience, understanding, those things, and life force flowing, creative forces. So that's what you're working on building, and that's what your deeper self seeks. If you lose track of that, the deeper self starts to withdraw, and then health really becomes a problem. Never think too highly of yourself and never belittle yourself too much. You have almost lost hold of yourself at times and feeling sorry for yourself. You have nothing to feel sorry for, exclamation point. God is just as mindful of you, though you have made a wreck of some people's lives. And you'll have to meet it, karma, but that you are alive, that you are conscious, that you have the opportunity in this period of time to apply yourself in the reconstruction of what man is looking forward to should encourage you to know that God is mindful of each soul. Then use the abilities that you have, and you have many. Often Edgar would say your abilities are latent within you. You haven't engaged them. They're all there. You were created in Genesis 1 in the image of Elohim. You have all the powers of the creator latent within you. You have to engage them. And here he is saying you have many talents and abilities. Nothing save self stands in the way of the entity making or becoming a channel of blessings to many. For the entity may be assured, for the entity will find, nothing in heaven or hell or earth may separate thee from the knowledge and the use of the I am presence within, save selfishness or self. And then in another reading, he says, self is the only sin, that is selfishness. All the others are just modifications of that expression of the ego. So now you see, cooperation is a more powerful word than you thought because it takes you out of selfishness. As soon as you start to think to cooperate with someone else or with the life forces or with nature, you are coming out of self-focus, selfishness, and that breaks through the barrier.
All right. So now you're all getting to hear different perspectives of this consciousness. And this is one view. And again, to me, what's so interesting is I'm starting to pick up a pattern as we're going to talk towards the end of the presentation. These key words of your ego, your I am presence, your higher self. Again, these are very important topics that we need to really examine and see what's going on. And again, I want you to do your own research, but to me, this is very fascinating stuff.
Here?
Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Now, John Van Auken was talking about psychology. He mentioned the term ego. So what does that really mean, the ego? Well, Sigmund Freud basically coined this term of that there's three parts of a person: the id, the ego, and the superego. And so the id was the unconscious selfish desires of an individual, their instincts, the ego was the actual reality, and that's the ego is trying to balance the id and the superego, and the superego is your morality. Now, that's the perspective of Sigmund Freud. However, as we are starting to learn, and I'm starting to learn from not only the Edgar Cayce readings, spiritual readings, and other texts, it's not that it's the ego is to rule over the id and the superego, but that it's different. It's that we have a superego, and some people call it their higher selves, their I am presence. And that is the thing that should rule all your decision making. And that what you need to keep in control is your ego, your outer self, right? And whatever that I am presence is, it could have different definitions to a lot of different people, right? Both spiritually or religious or non-religious. And so I think that's very important that we understand this perspective. So if you're going to look at it from the biblical perspective, if you look at the Bible or the Old Testament, that's also the same thing that is found in Judaism, the book of Exodus and their scriptures. In Exodus 3:13 and 3:14 is one of the most important two lines that I think that are in the Bible. Moses said to God, when he's talking to this burning bush, if I come to the people of Israel and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is your name? What shall I say to them? And guess what God responds to Moses? I am that I am. That's interesting. And he said to say to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Okay, now again, this coincides with what we've been learning from all the different things within Electus Society. Now let's look in from Old Testament to New Testament about this idea of God or this consciousness. As John Van Alken said, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you, so it's inside me. And then Jesus said all these different statements, like in John, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And then, he who believes in me shall never die. Okay, I got it. And whoever lives and believes in me, do you believe this? And then in John 5:30, I can myself do nothing. Wait, what? Jesus is now saying, I can't do anything. And he says, as I hear, I judge. It's not my judgment is righteous. It's because I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. So again, Jesus often refers to God as his Father. And then he says, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Again, there's so many different definitions or translations of the different biblical texts during this time. And then in John 14:12, it says, I can assure you that whoever believes in me will do the same things that I have done. So now Jesus is basically saying, hey, all these miracles that I'm doing, you're going to be able to do them too. Why? And even greater things you can do. You're like, what? Jesus is saying this? And again, so now we're starting to recognize that is he and other individuals talking about something that's greater than themselves that we all have within us? Again, this is just one perspective.